Florida State at 6-0, 4-0 in the ACC, going to Atlanta to take on Georgia Tech. The Yellow Jackets 2-5, 0-4 in the conference. Who would have thought that coming into 2015 after the run to the ACC Championship Game, as we bring in Mike McDaniel of Inside the ACC to help us break down the Seminoles and the Yellow Jackets. So, Mike, it all starts with Dalvin Cook on offense for Florida State, although Everett Golson may be the key to Florida State winning the ACC.
Yeah, you almost led me into the NFL game there, so I was getting a little bit concerned. But, yeah, Dalvin Cook's been incredible for Florida State. He's one of those guys that's just a dynamic player when he's on the field, whether he's 100% or not. He's been struggling with a hamstring injury for the last couple of weeks. He injured it in the second half against Wake Forest a couple of weeks back, and he was in and out of the lineup for the latter part of that game. But he had a great game against Miami. Went for over 200 yards rushing in that contest. And once again, last weekend, he kind of defied the odds in the second half. He finished with over 200 all-purpose yards after rushing for 169 yards for the game, or in the 160s. I'm not sure of the exact number, but he was pretty impressive there, rushing the football there in the second half. He's just shy of 1,000 yards on the year. He's at 955 on the season. So, I mean, no opponent has been able to really stop him outside of Boston College. They were able to at least slow him down, but Georgia Tech's defense has had their trials and tribulations this season, and if Dalvin Cook is healthy enough, I don't see them stopping him this weekend. I think Cook will easily get his 45 yards to get to 1,000. He might get that all in the first quarter with the way Georgia Tech's rushing defense has played over the last couple of weeks, but yeah, Cook is a dynamic player. He's a guy that could definitely be in Heisman contention as we head towards the home stretch here, going towards the end of the season. But he's been great. Everett Golson, a guy that turned the ball over 22 times last season, has yet to turn the football over once through 6 games for Florida State. He's got 11 touchdown passes and nearly 1,500 yards passing. So slowly but surely, he's getting more acclimated with the offense, and he hasn't really had to do too much because Dalvin Cook has just been that extraordinary in the backfield, just building off of the momentum that he gained as a freshman last season. So Florida State's offense is starting to click, which is pretty scary for most teams in the ACC, but we'll see when the real test comes in a couple of weeks against Clemson.
Yeah, it is looking better. Put up some points in the second half against a very good Louisville defense, and then 2 weeks back looked good in the fourth quarter and coming back from a score down against Miami to pull out a comeback victory. I think what might be the issue here is that Dalvin Cook, so sensational. He really won the game against South Florida. In particular, they were struggling against the Bulls, believe it or not. They only beat Wake Forest by less than a touchdown. They only scored in the mid-20s, I think 24 points in that game. Couldn't score against Boston College. You look at Golson's numbers, you look at Cook and his production, which is Heisman worthy at this point. You wonder why they can't score more points. And I think it's that they don't trust Everett Golson to really open it up. So the stats look nice, but he's completing everything underneath. They have a young receiving core loaded with 4 and 5 stars, but they're not trusting those guys to get open downfield and Golson to deliver the ball downfield. So the stats look good and Golson's efficiency looks good, but they're just not breaking open for big plays. And then Cook saving them in the fourth quarter when he's wearing down defenses and he starts breaking off 50-yard runs. So that's been the formula for Florida State on offense, and it seems to work and will work against most teams because they're certainly just more talented than anybody they're going to play probably outside of Clemson. So that's where we stand offensively. Florida State defensively, it at least statistically, Mike, looks to be another strong Florida State defense, but they're getting burned at times.
Yeah, their secondary has given up some big plays to date and some plays that have kind of, kept teams in games where you thought Florida State would put them away with just 1 or 2 defensive stops, but then they give up a big play and you're sitting there wondering, well, now the offense with Everett Golson, what is he like passing the football? Do we want him having to go down the field and win us a game? They haven't gotten into that scenario yet, thankfully, but the Seminoles offensively, like you said, Golson's been efficient, but you don't want to throw him into the fire yet. I think Clemson game is going to tell us a lot about Everett Golson, where he is as a quarterback, and his college career is winding down. So I think if Florida State wants a really good chance to win the game against Clemson, Golson is going to have to pass the ball. But like you said, defensively, there hasn't been a ton of strain because Dalvin Cook has just eaten up the clock rushing the football on offense for Florida State. But when they have been on the defensive side of the ball, they've struggled at times in the secondary. There's no question about that. Trey Marshall, their starting nickelback, is now out for the season after injuring his biceps, tearing those in the first game, and I believe it was his left arm against Louisville last weekend. And they're hoping that with surgery this past week, maybe he'll get back in time for a bowl game, but that kind of remains to be seen at this point. Expect a lot of Derwin James in the secondary for Florida State. He's been fantastic, playing one of many safety positions for Florida State with their nickel defense, and they play that a lot of times as their base. So Derwin James is another very talented freshman. He's been playing very well. Tyler Hunter, he's a veteran. He's been burned. He got replaced in last weekend's game. He's going to have to play a lot better if he sees considerable playing time throughout the rest of this season, because he's been a liability back there. But the rushing defense has been pretty good, even though they've been missing some guys up front. A lot of guys have been shuffling in and out of the lineup in the front seven, but they've done a pretty good job of stopping the run, and they're going to have to do a great job of it this weekend, because even though Georgia Tech's had a down season, they're still 8th in the country in rushing. So this will be a big-time test for the Florida State rush defense. We'll see where they're actually at, whether it's a measure of the opponents Florida State's played to date, or just the talent that they have on that side of the ball. That's something we'll find out this weekend against a still very talented Georgia Tech rushing attack.
Yeah, Georgia Tech has to be the best five in college football, if nothing else. I know that's not much consolation. They've lost a lot of close games. Notre Dame was really the team that really put the hammer down and dominated that game. Clemson, Georgia Tech, they went back and forth, and then Clemson really took it to them in the fourth quarter to pull away in that game. The other games have been excruciatingly close, even on the surface. Duke scored late to make that a 14-point game, but that was down to the wire in the last 4 or 5 minutes at least. Justin Thomas, if you look at his statistical performance, he's pretty much doing what he does, although I think it might be significant that he's only completing 44% of his passes as opposed to like 50-52 last year, 10 touchdowns, 4 picks. So you're never going to get the efficiency, but he was able to scare defenses enough to keep them honest in the pass game and get it down the field. And they've lost their wide receiver core this year. And it's obviously been an issue with Georgia Tech that they were really humming on offense with the big explosive pass play complementing the runs 90% of the time last season, and they just haven't replaced that this year.
Yeah, and I think some of it is also a token of Georgia Tech's defense just not playing as well in spots this season, putting a lot of pressure on Justin Thomas and that offense to throw the football more than maybe they had hoped. And even when they haven't been in those situations late in games where Thomas has been forced to throw, he's just been mediocre at best on his mid-level passing situations where he's looking not necessarily deep down the field, but the short to intermediate pass game. He just has not been nearly as crisp as he has relative to last year. He's never been an extremely efficient passer, but when you go from 52 to the mid to low 40s, and as far as completion percentage is concerned, that is a problem when you're trying to move the football, especially when the rushing defense is getting stopped and you're in a situation where all of a sudden you're in a third and long situation there. And they've kind of become predictable, I think, in that regard, as far as when they're going to throw the football. So that hasn't helped either. And when you get Georgia Tech to throw the football and make Justin Thomas put the ball in the air, I think that's a position that most defenses playing against Georgia Tech would hope for and would feast on, because they do know that he's not the greatest passer in college football. So I think it's all been kind of a testament to Georgia Tech's struggles. It all kind of intertwines. It starts with the defense playing better, stopping the run, defending the pass more adequately, and then Justin Thomas getting the offense into third and short versus third and long and not having to throw the football as much. I think that's the ultimate remedy to Georgia Tech's problems. But I don't think there's a lot that's separating the Yellow Jackets from the team they were a year ago to where they are right now at 2-5 and winless in the ACC. I mean, it's that thin of a margin for error when you're running that triple option offense.
Yeah, Justin Thomas again, hitting big plays last season, 18 touchdowns, 5 picks, more efficient in the passing game as well. What's interesting to note is they lost DeAndre Smelter to the NFL. Also, Darren Waller was a big play guy for them in the passing game, and they didn't light it up. Obviously, they didn't get the opportunities, but they both caught somewhere between 28 and 35 passes for tons of yardage per catch. When they were catching passes, they were for big yardage. Right now, Mike, they have one pass catcher with more than single digits receptions. So they've got Ricky June with 14 receptions, 20.4 per catch. So that speaks to their approach to the passing game. They're going to get it downfield with 3 pass receptions for touchdowns. But besides that, everybody's in like single digits, like 4 or 5 pass receptions. So very little out of the passing game. And I think Broderick Snoddy, a guy that we thought they would count on, he's been a big loss. He's been banged up most of the season. He's missed the last 3 games. So he was averaging 11 yards per carry and just has not been in the lineup. Justin Thomas, again for a second consecutive year, leads the team in rushing, but his yards per carry way down at 3.3 this year. So he just hasn't broken loose for big plays. And if you take out the 2 huge wins in the blowout games against I think it was Alcorn State and Tulane to get out of the chute, the numbers go way down for the rushing attack. So even though it's 8th in the country, it's not quite to what it's been in the past. So Florida State and Georgia Tech here. It could be a trap game for Florida State, and maybe one of the reasons why Vegas still respects Georgia Tech in this one. It's just like a 5.5-point underdog at home.
Yeah, it's a trap game. It's a night game, and it's in Atlanta, and that's all that's the recipe for a Georgia Tech upset. But Georgia Tech's defense will have absolutely no answer for Dalvin Cook. As long as Dalvin Cook's in the lineup and he's healthy, I don't see any reason why Florida State wouldn't be able to win the football game, and that goes for any team they play. I think they have a good chance against Clemson in a couple of weeks just because of how good Dalvin Cook has been, but a lot of it is whether or not his hamstring holds up. It held up well enough last weekend against Louisville. He exited the game late, but the game was already in hand, and he did his damage there in the second half before he exited late in the fourth quarter. But I think as long as Dalvin Cook is healthy enough to run the football to the best of his capabilities, and even if he's a 70 or 80% of himself, I think that's better than most running backs in college football at their very best. So I'll take Florida State. I think it will be a closer game than some people are predicting, but I think Florida State will win this game by a touchdown, maybe even 10 points. I think Dalvin Cook, once again, for the 3rd or 4th week in a row, will be the difference in the football game.
Mike McDaniel from inside the ACC helping us break down Florida State as the Seminoles go to Atlanta. And, of course, FSU, despite some spotty play at times this season, lined up for another run to the ACC Championship at 4-0 in the conference, 6-0 overall. Thanks for the breakdown, Mike.
All right. Thanks, Mark.